Hi, I'm Ron with Cruising This Old Boat, and today I'm going to show you how to control your autopilot from your Garmin GPS map 1243 XSV. There's actually two ways to control your autopilot using your Garmin GPS map 1243 XSV. The first way is you can select the home screen, and across the bottom you see various selections. The rightmost selection is called Vessel. Select that. And this brings up another menu, and you're going to need to scroll this one to the left. As you do that, you'll see Autopilot appearing on the right hand side of the screen. Select Autopilot. And this brings up your Autopilot control panel. Now at this point, we're going to stop and go back and show you the other way, because I think the other way is a better choice if you're wanting to control your autopilot from your Garmin GPS map 1243. But it's going to bring you back to this same screen. So let's go back to home. Get back to our charts. So this is just back where we started. And what we're going to do is create a toolbar for the autopilot controls. So if you look on the very bottom towards the right, you'll see a button called Toolbars. Go ahead and select that. And it will bring up a toolbar. Now if it doesn't bring up the autopilot toolbar, then you're going to need to press on this button to switch it to the autopilot toolbar. So go ahead and do that. And now we have the autopilot toolbar. Now we could actually do things at this point, but just to show you why I think this is a better way, the first thing I want to do is make this a permanent toolbar. So if you're wanting to control your autopilot from your Garmin, then you'd probably want this to be permanently on your screen. You may have to react to situations and you're not going to want to have to go find it. So we're going to add this toolbar to the screen. And you do that through either of these add buttons. The one on the left is to add the toolbar to the top of your screen. And the one on the right is to add the toolbar to the bottom of your screen. And I'm going to add it to the bottom of the screen. So we're going to press the right hand button. And now that toolbar is permanently part of my screen until I tell it otherwise. There's some things you can do from this toolbar. Let's go over those first. All the way to the left is a little colored circle with an arrow in it, and that's merely an indicator of which mode you're in. It has no functionality. You can't press on it, make it do anything. It merely indicates by color which mode you're in. If you look over on the left, you see where it says standby. That's because my autopilot is in standby. And if you've used autopilot, you know you have three choices: standby, heading hold, and follow route. Now I'm going to show you how to select these, but I'm docked at the moment, so it's not going to be happy that I'm trying to turn on the autopilot while I'm not moving. So I'm going to have to go in it and out of it fairly quickly so as to not cause issues with my autopilot. But if you see this button right here, that's how you change the selection. It's strictly a toggle switch. The indication label will tell you whether you're in standby, heading hold, or follow route. However, the toggle switch will only toggle between standby and heading hold. So if you're in follow route and you press the toggle switch, you will leave follow route, but you will go to heading hold. And from that point, you'll only be able to toggle between the two. If you want to go back to follow route, you have to use a different method, which I'll show you later. So that button is similar to the toggle switch button, whatever you have on your control module for your autopilot. I have the GHC20, so mine's an actual button I press. The later models just be a screen presentation of a button, but it's the same thing. Now if you're in heading hold, you'll have a further option of being able to turn your boat 1 degree port or starboard, or some predetermined number of degrees port or starboard. On my boat, I keep that at 5, and I'll show you how to do that a little bit later. The next thing you see is a compass. Now this little blue triangle on your compass denotes which way you're heading at the moment. However, if you were in heading hold, then it would display another little triangle coming down from the top that denotes which bearing you have selected on your heading hold. All right, so here you can see the little triangle. You also see a yellow line that tells you the distance between where I'm supposed to be and where I am. And I gotta get out of there. Autopilot does not like to be run standing still, but I wanted you to see what that looks like. Now this next button is kind of a recently used button, so what is on that button will change depending on what was the last thing you selected. So in this case, it's showing a zigzag. If I press that button, it will immediately go into the zigzag mode. But if the last thing I did was a circle mode, it would display a circle on this button, and by selecting the button, I would go into going into a circle. So what's on that button will just depend on what is the last thing you used, and it's the pattern steerings is what shows up on there. Now before we get to the last button, I want to show you that there are some things missing currently, and that's because I don't have a course selected for follow route. So I'm going to quickly jump over and put in a route just to show you what those missing items look like and what they do. Okay, so I now have a route selected to follow, and you can see it with the pink line here, but I have not told it to engage the autopilot. So it now gives me this extra little button, and if I press that button, then it will engage the autopilot. Now I'm going to do this so you can see it, but again, I'm going to get out pretty quickly because it's not going to be happy. But I want you to see that when I press this button, not only does it engage follow route, but it's going to give another indicator that I don't currently have. And that's going to be over on the left side of the screen, and that indicator merely lets you know you're in follow route, along with it saying follow route. So here we go. We'll press the button. You see over here it says follow route, and right next to it, it has the same symbol as the engage follow route button, and that just lets you know that you're on follow route. All right, finally we have this button all the way to the right, and if you press that button, it brings you back to the control screen that we saw by going through the other way. So you can see how this would be so much faster if you already have the toolbar permanently on your screen. All you have to do is press that button, and here you are. So it gets you here quicker. Now this gives you the complete menu options of controlling your Garmin Autopilot. So the first things you see is a compass rose. It tells you which way you're headed. It tells you that you're in standby, whether you're on heading hold or follow route. It gives you numerical indication of which way you're headed and your speed. So that's your indicators. If you have a dedicated multifunctional display for your autopilot, then you may choose to leave it on this screen. Otherwise, it's just something you can access if you need to do more than what's available on that toolbar. Our first choice is to engage the circle. If I were to depress that, it would start to turn a circle as defined by you in the settings, which I'll show in just a minute. But this way you don't have to go through a lot of steps to turn a circle. You just press the button and you begin turning a circle. The next button is to engage heading hold. And from this screen, it's the same as the last screen where you just toggle between standby, heading hold. So if I press this button, it would engage the heading hold and I would maintain whatever course I was doing at the time I pressed the button. The next button is pattern steering, and if you depress that button, then it brings up 4 options of types of pattern steerings you can do. One is a U-turn, one is a circle, the third is a zigzag, and the fourth is a Williamson turn, which is kind of like a question mark. Now each of these you can set parameters. So if you press the button for U-turn, it's going to ask if you want to make your U-turn to port or to starboard. And you select which one you want, and that's the direction it will turn. If you choose circles, then it not only asks you if you want to circle to port or if you want to circle to starboard, but it'll also ask you how long you want it to take to complete one circle. So obviously the shorter amount of time, the tighter the circle, the more amount of time, the bigger the circle. So that's just a choice up to you, depending on where you're at, what you're trying to do, how much room you have. But it's this time that's indicated there, that when you press this engage circle, that's how long it will take. The next choice is zigzag. If you press that button, then you can determine how long you want to be on each zig or zag. That's the period. And then the amplitude is how far off the middle line you want to go in that period of time. So the greater the amplitude, the sharper the turn you'll make to head away from your center line, and the sharper the turn you will make to come back and across your center line. The smaller the amplitude, you'll make less of a turn, and then whatever amplitude you choose, the period will determine how long you're on that course. So the longer the period, the further you get away from your center line. And then of course, once you have your amplitude and period set, you would just depress engage zigzag and you would commit zigzagging. And the final choice is the Williamson turn. We'll press that button. And again, it just wants to know if you want to make that turn to port or to starboard. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Williamson turn and you might wonder what is its purpose, if you have a man overboard, then a Williamson turn is a good thing to engage, because it brings you back to the same route you were on after your turn. All the others, the circles, U-turns, you end up somewhere else than where you came from. But a Williamson turn will bring you back onto the same bearing that you came from. So if you had a man fall overboard, you have a better chance of finding him again. So that's all the pattern steerings. The next choice we have is the autopilot setup. If you press that button, here you have all the different ways to set up your autopilot. The first one is the steering mode. This is merely a toggle switch between step, and if you press it, rudder. The difference between rudder and step mode is that in rudder, those port and starboard arrows that you can push on to turn the boat one way or another will turn it 1 degree, and that's the only option you have. And I can show you that. I'm gonna leave it in rudder, and we're gonna go back to the autopilot toolbar, and I'll show you how that looks. It only has the option for 1 degree turns, so that's all you can do is 1 degree. Now let's go back to that toggle, and we're going to change it from rudder to step. And in the step mode, you have the choice of either turning it 1 degree or turning it some preset determined value, which currently on my boat is 5 degrees. So now that I have it in step, we're going to go back to that same toolbar and show you the difference. And you see now it has both 1 degree and 5 degrees. So that's the difference between the step mode and the rudder mode. Now what determines the step, like I said, on my boat it's 5 degrees, and you can see that here. What determines that is this next button. If we're in the step mode, the next selection is the step turn size, and this is where you can choose when you depress the left or right or port and starboard buttons how many degrees it turns. Like I said, I have mine set for 5 degrees, but you have a choice of 5, 10, 15, 20, and so on. So you can choose how many degrees you want it to turn. The next button is the shadow drive setup. If we press that button, we can either enable or disable the shadow drive merely by pressing the top button. Now it's disabled, now it's enabled. You can see that when it's enabled, it gives me a choice of the sensitivity, and that's how much you have to turn the wheel before shadow drive realizes that you are taking control. So you can change the sensitivity to where you barely touch the wheel and it will give control over to you, or you can make it to where you have to really do some serious turning before it gives up control. I find that sensitivity at 50% works pretty good. I'd recommend starting at that, and then you can adjust it as it suits you. All right, we'll go back. The next button is direction control. This is, again, just a toggle switch. You can either have it disabled or enabled. Mine currently is in disabled. I recommend you leave yours there. But if you press the button, then you merely toggle over to enabled. Now what the difference is between those two is, if it's disabled, your autopilot will only control your boat in a forward direction. If you have it enabled, as it is right now, your autopilot can either take your boat forward or backward. Now, I don't know what boats use their autopilot in reverse. There must be some out there if Garmin put it on here, but I will tell you from personal experience, learned the very hard way, if your autopilot accidentally gets switched into reverse, it's not a good thing. Your boat will immediately do a 180 degree turn to go the other direction. So I've had that happen on this boat before I learned about it, when there are other boats around me, and when you're just traveling along and suddenly your boat wants to execute a 180 degree turn with other boats around you, it's not a good thing. So I highly recommend that you depress this button and leave that direction control disabled. That way your boat can only go forward in autopilot. The next button is preferred sources, and that just gives you a choice between where you get your bearings from. If we press that button, all right, the first line is your GPS, so it wants to know where do you want to get your GPS from. If you want to change that, I have mine to auto, so it selects whatever's giving it the best signal. If you want to change that, you would depress this button on the right called change source, and you have choices between built-in. These other listings are various components on my boat, so your boat may read something different, but you can either pre-select which source on your boat you want the GPS position to come from, or you can just select auto and it will find the best signal. Likewise for your reactor 40, if you select that, then you can use the change source button to determine where your GPS source comes for your reactor 40. Here I only have the choice of the reactor 40, so that's it. It provides its own compass. Next you have the alarms button. And if you depress that, then you can choose various alarms that may be listed. I only have the off course alarm listed. And if you press these 3 buttons, then you can change how far off course before it gives you a alarm. Mine is set at 20 degrees. And the whole purpose of that is if your autopilot fails for some reason and you start drifting off course, it will sound an alarm and let you know. We'll go back. All right, the next button is your autopilot installation setup. This is not something you would normally use from your chart plotter unless you're doing an initial setup. I'm going to make a separate video about that. So if you are interested in knowing how to do an autopilot installation setup, go find that video. It will be called Garmin GPS map 1243 XSV autopilot installation setup. And that will show you how to do all the things that are in there, some of which need to be underway. So we're going to cancel that. And the last button on this screen is Diagnostics. If we press that button, then it brings up information about your Garmin Autopilot. It's got 3 pages. You just press these left and right arrows to scroll between the pages. And it just gives you a lot of information. Most of this information may not be useful to you, but one time I had a problem with my Garmin Autopilot and I had to contact the Garmin technical service, and they had me go into this screen. The information in the screen enabled them to troubleshoot my Garmin Autopilot and discovered that my compass wasn't working properly. And so I got a new compass from them and everything started working properly. That's what this information is good for mostly. And this button up here allows you to save this information to a card in case you want to keep a history of your diagnostics to see changes over time, or if you want to send it to somebody for them to review. All right, so we'll press back. And that completes everything in the autopilot screen. We'll press back again, and we have one final button to talk about, and that is this response button. You can see that mine is currently in normal. If you press that button, then you can either use the sliding scale, and you see it changing up above, or you can use the up and down buttons, and again you see it changing up above. And what that does is dictate how responsive the rudder control is to your commands. So the higher the response, the faster the rudder will turn when you tell it to turn using your autopilot. And the lower the response, the slower it will turn in response to your command to turn. So for instance, if you had like on my boat, you have your step button set to 5 degrees. When I press that button, the higher the response, the faster it's going to turn 5 degrees. The lower the response, the slower it will take to turn to 5 degrees. So that's what the response is. And that's just going to be a personal preference, in part driven by the kind of boat you have. But normal has worked very well for me over the years. But you just have to play with your boat and see what works for you. And that brings us back to our navigational chart. And as you see, our autopilot toolbar is still there. And like I said, it will remain there until I tell it otherwise. So that's particularly helpful if this particular chart plotter is not located at the same place as your GHC control panel. I only have one GHC on board my boat, but I have a chart plotter at both my upper and lower helm. So this allows me to control the autopilot from the location where my GHC is not at. And that's the benefit of having that. So that's how you control your autopilot from your Garmin GPS Map 1243 XSV. Thanks for watching.